Okay, commissioners, if you could just turn your cameras on once you're back, so I know that you're available, and then we've got a quorum. Okay, looks like we do have a quorum, so we will continue with our discussion of amendment number 2 to ZO09-21. So we are completed with public comment. Back to the commission for final comment before we call the roll on amendment number 2. We'll start with Commissioner Burrell. Go ahead.
Hi, I have a question for staff. This is the second time I've heard about the city's infrastructure, that duplexes would not be supported by the current infrastructure. Can anybody speak on that?
I see, I think Scott Robinson, Director Scott Robinson is able to respond to that. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Whistler. Yeah, I've coordinated frequently with Vic Kilson, the Director of City Bloomington Utilities Department, on a variety of things, and I asked him to kind of provide some feedback about what this proposal entails. So as you know, CBU provides water service, sanitary sewer service, and storm service for the community. So on the water side, the delivery of potable drinking water, there's no relationship between population density and the probability of a main break. I mean, there was a lot of comments about what's happening with the main breaks this winter. There's no correlation with that in population density. And at this time, CBU does not have any issues with water supply. So our water supply is in good shape. On the sanitary sewer side, CBU expects to develop a plan for allocating the cost of sewer expansion in each sewer basin. So if you know the community, there's several sanitary sewer basins. There's 2 treatment facilities, one to the north and one to the south. Again, you know, current and future, to accommodate current and future growth needs, but small unit development, 1 to 2 new units per block or 2 will not significantly impact the treatment capacity. And then the last point with the storm sewer infrastructure, a lot of the older areas of the community don't have that infrastructure, but CBU does review, you know, new developments in order to accommodate that. They are putting in infrastructure to help deal with storm flow and what have you. So again, I think from the infrastructure side, at least from CBU, I wanted to offer that comment. I do think there were some other comments about, you know, roads and infrastructure. You know, if you look at our transportation plan, in fact, a lot of the guidelines in the city's transportation plan mimic the standards that were built in a lot of these older neighborhoods. You know, narrow streets that allow on-street parking. That's the model that we are using to look for our future neighborhoods. So again, that's the infrastructure. I think those were the points that you had a question on, and hopefully I'd be able to provide any additional feedback.
Thank you, Scott. Does that answer your question, Flavia? Okay, additional comments or questions from commissioners? Commissioner St. John.
Yep, I have a question for staff, and I don't know if this is a Scott question or a Mike question, but there have been comments, so many comments to make about renters, and so could you share some insight as to how viable it is that someone could buy half of a duplex and own their half of duplex instead of rent it?
I guess I could take a stab at the, you know, just to make it clear, we can't regulate ownership. There's a lot of things that prohibit us from doing that, and a lot of good reasons why. but the possibility that somebody could purchase a duplex and rent it out is certainly a viable possibility. It could be somebody that would rent both sides. You know, to condoize a duplex, I don't know the challenges of that if you had two owners on both sides, but I do know that they exist in other communities. I don't know if they exist here, but I do think all three of those options would be available for a duplex, where you'd have an owner on one side, a renter on another. Both units would be renter, and maybe in some situations you could have an owner on both sides, but that would have to kind of go through a condo kind of agreement with that. I don't know if Mr. Rooker has any additional comments that he'd like to provide.
No, thank you, Scott. Mike Rooker, city attorney for the city. I think that's accurate. There would be a variety of ownership configurations that would be imaginable in a duplex or a triplex.
So it is possible then with duplexes that someone could be owning these and not just renting these.
Yes, of course.
Okay, thank you. So great. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any additional comments or questions? Commissioner Kinsey, go ahead.
One question about the discrepancy or the stated discrepancy, or a question about the housing availability and the differences in the number that commenter Margaret Clemens mentioned. And I wonder if anyone can comment on that from the staff. I mean, the assertion that the numbers of 4,000, I don't know if it was 4,098 or at one point it was 4,908, I'm not sure, but that the housing shortage is being overstated. Can someone offer some comment about that from the staff side to get us some accurate numbers?
Scott, would you like to
I
respond
could
to
try to
that?
tackle that. We were trying to figure out where that number came from in those comments. The data that we've been looking at is different than those numbers. I do think there's some confusion on units versus bedrooms. Sometimes we track number of bedrooms versus units. The UDO doesn't do that. You know, the old, UDO used to look at bedrooms, so there might be some confusion there. Approved projects is different than actually what's being constructed. So there might be some projects going through the pipeline that are being considered for approval or have been recently approved, but they still need to go through financing, grading permit, possibly subdivision. So sometimes while maybe they've been before the Plan Commission and got quote unquote approved, some of these projects are still maybe a couple of years in the pipeline before there's actually, ready to move in. So quite honestly, I'm not sure where that 4,000 number has come from compared to the other data sources that we have.
Commissioner Kinsey, did that complete your question?
Thanks.
Other questions or final comments from commissioners on amendment number 2? Commissioner Cochran, go ahead. Go ahead, Chris.
So again, I support this amendment. In my professional opinion, I don't think we are going to see a flood of investors in the core neighborhoods. The numbers don't work. But just as we were just talking about, an owner-occupied side, and this could work for duplex, triplex, or quads, because you could still get residential financing. Those numbers can make a little bit more sense because it's not so much the return on investment, it's lowering the housing cost for that particular owner. So those numbers could work for an owner-occupied unit, which I like that. I think that's an opportunity to for young homeowners or first-time homeowners to build great equity into their properties. But what we have to do is remove the hurdles to adding to our housing stock, rentals and owner-occupied. And we need to work hard to find ways and areas for new and existing areas to accomplish this. This amendment encourages this. It's not the solution, but it helps. And I respectfully disagree that adding diverse housing to our market, including in the core neighborhoods, will not create affordability. However, adding more housing options will create affordability for our community as a whole. Basic supply and demand. However, it will take a lot of time and a lot of effort to move the needle. So affordability crisis in Bloomington, it's not a neighborhood issue, it's a community issue. And we need to work really hard in all areas of Bloomington to find ways to adding to our housing stock. And again, I support this amendment and I hope it passes.
Thank you. Additional final comments from commissioners? Commissioner Kinsey, go ahead.
I have final comments about the amendment if we're ready for that. I don't know if anybody else still has some questions.
I think we're ready.
Okay.
Go for it.
Well, after hearing a lot more comments, and again, I really have appreciated all the time that people have spent studying this issue as we've all been kind of studying it and learning more about this as we've been working through these, for me, at least since 2018, when I joined the Plan Commission. So for me, increased housing density and diversity of types is a solution for equity, environmental sustainability, and increasing housing stock. These are all much needed things in our community. The permitted use, by making it permitted use, it also opens up our highly desirable residential neighborhoods for more people to live and walk and be closer to what they love about this community. It's not the answer to affordable housing. I understand that, and I think everybody has made that clear here tonight. It's one solution, though, to get us closer to that. I'm particularly persuaded by the commenters who indicated that duplexes, permitted use of duplexes allows for the creation of market price duplexes that cost less than single family homes. I'm persuaded by that. I think that is an important element to lift up. I also think that this process has really reflected community members. I mean, not only as an estimate of how many people have commented and stuck with us during these long hours, but I'm really appreciative of some of the younger people and the renters' views that have represented here tonight. So to me, that's also, it's at least affirming that we are not completely eliminating people from this discussion. That would concern me a lot, and I don't feel like that's been the case. Zoning is a long-term tool to help us get where we want to be, and right now, again, persuaded by the commenters who offered the perception that right now it's technically illegal to turn anything into anything but an expensive, perhaps single home. So the idea of wanting more options is really persuasive to me. And, I guess I also want to make sure that we're not forcing people who work at Middle Way House and other Catalent and other places in our community to have to move to the county. I would really like them to be able to live closer to town and to the things that they want to participate in. If we continue to quote chapter and verse from the comprehensive plan, I'll offer mine. I completely agree with everybody who already discovered that 5.3.1 is definitely in support of single family dwelling in core neighborhoods. But the other thing that the comprehensive plan does on page 23 is acknowledge the consistent challenges of managing growth in a college town and providing high density residential development for both renters and owners while maintaining access to retail, restaurants, parks, supporting walkable, livable neighborhoods. So I'm persuaded by that. Even in our comprehensive plan, we've got some tensions in our comp plan. And I recognize that, but I think it's fair to raise the other sides of those issues as well. Finally, I want current property owners who can do duplexes to not have to run the gauntlet of approvals. I'd like them to be able to manage a process without having to run through a lot of hoops that really seem, I'm not sure who they're protecting. I think they're just really inhibiting and hindering growth. So I think that's a real concern in terms of not making these permitted uses. And finally, just from my own perspective, I don't feel rushed in this. I have not felt rushed. I felt like we had a lot of time to consider the full scope of the issues. I spent a lot of time reading up on materials and looking at other information. I participated in many of the outreach sessions that the staff conducted, and I was amazed at the number of people who participated in those outreach sessions that went on through all of October and November, and really felt that there was an adequate supply of information. So I really hope we can support Amendment 2 and would like to see us modernize our zoning and expand the diversity of housing types. Duplexes will help us do this. It'll be one step in, I think, the right direction. So thank you.
Thank you. Additional final comments from commissioners? Anyone else? Commissioner St. John, go ahead.
Yeah, I do have a comment. I think it's just, and I wasn't ignoring this before, but just to drive home the point that people could own half of a duplex does to some degree negate that it's just all about rents that are going to go up. People can actually use this as a step toward home ownership. And as Commissioner Cockerham pointed out, it could actually be someone who could afford the whole thing and could be using those rents to help pay for that. Or maybe it's someone they just own half, but either way, it's a step out of being in a rental situation. People who are part of our community, I don't buy the argument that renters don't care about our community. I used to be a renter and I'm still here and I'm going to my 40th year in Bloomington. I mean, renters really care about this community. They just are renting because they don't have the money to buy property. And once they get the money, they need to have property to buy in the first place. So I'm going to say the public process works here because I was going to vote conditional, but I actually am going to vote in favor of this because I do support this, the idea of increasing the housing stock. And for me, it's just go big or go home. Like if we're going to do it, let's do it. Knowing that, as I said earlier, the UDO is living and breathing and we can change this. But if we're going to do it, let's give it our all and see if it works.
Thank you. Any other final comments from commissioners? Commissioner Seabour, go ahead.
I'll just be really brief. I just first again want to thank everybody that has shared their feedback and their comments and asked questions. I appreciate all the other commissioners for sitting through all these and staff for leading us through it and preparing and being ready to answer some tough questions. I just really want to say through the conversation, I heard terms like lack of respect and lack of ethics. And I just want to say that I personally very much appreciate this whole process. I totally respect everyone's comments and opinions. And I think that's when I come to a city like Bloomington, that's something I come to expect. And I hope that we can all have differences of opinions and be able to come to the same space and share that feedback. And I think that's really healthy. And so I appreciate everybody participating in this process and sharing those comments. And I think just for me, I just want to specify that this is a tough decision. And that, I mean, we get so many different comments on all the different sides, and I think they all have very valid reasons. And I guess just for me, I will be voting no on this amendment, but I fully respect all perspectives on this, and I just look forward to seeing how everything plays out. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Kate, go ahead.
Just really fast. Well, I will be voting no on this too. I just want to say, I typically do actually support right development with as few hurdles as possible. And I think that that is basically where our zoning should be heading, more form-based zoning with fewer discretionary decisions so that the developers know what they're getting, that the community knows what it's getting. In this particular instance, I'm persuaded that the conditional use approach is a better approach to smooth this transition. But I also would anticipate that all of the monitoring that the staff has already, identified it will be doing to figure out where we go next will, kind of take us to whatever the next stage is. And whether that ends up then being by right because the sky hasn't fallen, or it requires some other tinkering and tweaking to make sure that the outcome for the neighborhoods, all neighborhoods in this community, because I agree with Commissioner Cochran, this is an issue. Accessible housing, affordable housing is an issue for the whole community. But the idea of keeping an eye on this and proceeding with a little bit more caution, I'm persuaded in this case it's a good way to go. But generally speaking, I have to say, my heart, it's been very hard for me too, listening to these comments, because generally I prefer a cleaner approach that presents a whole lot more certainty to the market and to the community. But I will be voting on this amendment.
Thank you. Additional final comments? Any other final comments from commissioners? All right, I will add my 2 cents, or maybe 3 cents. But first, I want to echo what others have said and just thank everyone for their patience and for their input here. I know there's a lot of emotion on all sides of this. I do want to take a minute just to respond to some of the comments that I heard. And there was, a kind of common assertion that just considering this is really somehow disrespectful to our long-term residents, and that somehow that we need to pay greater attention and give greater weight to those residents. And I certainly appreciate those folks who have been here a long time, but the assertion that our short-term residents or renters are somehow less important, that their opinions don't carry as much weight, I just have to reject. And sadly, I even heard one commenter say that students weren't acceptable as neighbors, and it breaks my heart when I hear those kinds of comments. And I think that that's just a way of thinking that we really need to get past. Renters are our neighbors. The majority of our neighbors are renters. And I really hope that we'll start to fully embrace that, renters, even student renters, perhaps especially students, as neighbors, and reject the notion that anyone's opinion matters more because of what they do for a living or how long they've been here. I just want to send a very clear message to anyone who's listening that, to me, this is really simple. If you live in Bloomington, you have a voice that matters. I don't care if you lived here 50 years or 5 hours. If you live here, you're part of this community, and we welcome you and we embrace you. And secondly, I quickly wanted to just respond to one assertion that Commissioner Cochran somehow has a conflict of interest because of his work in real estate. And I just couldn't disagree more with that. First of all, Commissioner Cochran is a man of integrity, and he always recuses himself if he has any kind of financial interest in a petition that's before us. He's done that on several occasions. But more importantly, I just want to say that, the fact that we have an expert in land use and in the real estate market on this commission is an asset. That is a feature, not a bug. And I'm thankful for it. So on the issue, I think it's clear that we need more affordable housing. I don't think there's much disagreement on that. And I think really the question at hand is where do we need that affordable housing? And that's what this amendment addresses. I think we need to open the possibility of affordable housing in walkable neighborhoods, not just on the 4th floor of a new 5-story building, or out on the outskirts, miles from the closest amenities. Duplexes are really the only responsible way to open up that possibility. The alternative is to have segregated, isolated affordable housing. And we've got a century's worth of evidence that that approach is bad for communities and just bad for the human condition. The simple fact is that this amendment will simply make it legal. It will not make it easy. ADUs are proof that we not only need to make it legal, we need to make it easier for this type of housing to enter the market. If you turn on HGTV right now, you won't have to wait more than an hour to see some real estate show where a home buyer decides they can buy their dream home that they never thought they could afford because adding a second unit makes it affordable. They don't decide to buy that house because they get a chance at adding that second unit if they can go win the favor of the zoning appeals board. Even if this is a permitted use, you'll still need to meet setback requirements, design standards, impervious surface limitations, occupancy limitations, historic preservation protections. There are pages and pages and pages of restrictions that apply to every single lot where a plex might be built. So the idea that this is going to somehow open the floodgates and that neighborhoods are going to be overrun with new rentals, I just don't think that's reality. I think the more likely outcome is that people will take advantage of plexes when it makes a new home affordable for them. And that is the point, and that is why I'm going to support this amendment. So unless there are any other final comments, last call before we call the roll. All right. I don't know if Jackie's back or Ryan is still with us, but
still me.
Okay, Ryan, would you call the roll, please, on amendment number 2 to ZO 09-21?
Kinsey,
Yes.
Kate,
No.
Herrera,
No.
Sandberg,
No.
St. John,
Yes.
Seaboard,
No.
Whistler,
Yes.
Burrell,
Yes.
Cochran.
Yes.
Passes 5-4.
All right, thank you very much. So with that, we have 2 more amendments, but I'm not sure if they're necessary to proceed. I believe that both of those would be rendered moot by the passage of Amendment 2, but certainly open to discussion on that. Maybe let me just ask one question of staff, specifically with regard to Amendment number 3. My interpretation or assumption would be that if plexes are by right, then the proximity limitations are therefore no longer in effect. Would that be correct?
No. So amendment number 2 actually addressed the use-specific standards that mentions the buffer and the 150-foot or the 2-year rule by changing it from conditional use to certificate of zoning compliance. So while it would no longer apply for the certificate for the conditional use, it will still apply for the certificate of zoning compliance. So Mike might want to weigh in, but this amendment would still be valid.
Okay, so even though it's by right that 150-foot limitation would still apply, even though it's by right.
Correct.
Okay. I would love to hear council just confirm that before we move forward.
Yeah, I think that's correct. Ryan and I were talking about this just before you voted on the amendment, so that's correct.
Okay. Well, then if that is the case, I would like to go ahead and introduce amendment number 3. And we are just before 9 p.m., which also happens to be tip-off time for the IU women's basketball game. So I know a lot of people want to go. our rule is that we don't introduce new business after 9 p.m. So if we introduce this, that would essentially mean that the meeting will continue till at least 9:30, at which time we would need a motion to suspend the rules to continue the conversation past that. So just wanted to kind of set the stage for that. It's my opinion that we ought to try to keep moving because we still have a lot of decisions to make, a lot of work to get done before we can send this on to the council. So I'd like to move for adoption of amendment number 3 to ZO 09-21, which remove the 150-foot proximity restriction. I'll give just a brief overview of why I want to introduce that. And the primary reason is that I think it's just kind of unfair. It sets a standard that one person's property has certain rights and others do not have the same rights simply by their proximity. So I think there's a fundamental fairness issue there. I think the second issue is if you are concerned that there's going to be a gold rush, a mad dash to build plexes in the neighborhoods, this can only serve to exacerbate that. Because if you are the type of out of town property owner that might want to take advantage of building a plex, you got to get it done before your neighbor builds one. Because as soon as your neighbor adds another unit, you can't have one. And so I think it's just, I understand the intent is to slow things down. I think the consequence might be the opposite. And at any rate, like I said, I think it's fundamentally unfair to say that you don't have the same rights as your neighbor just because they got there first. So that's why I think we ought to strike this. So again, I'm moving to introduce to adopt amendment number 3 to ZO 09-21. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right. So we have a motion and a second. Is there any questions for myself, for staff? Go ahead, Commissioner Seaboard.
I guess my question is more about our procedures. Assuming once this conversation starts, it may spill past 9:30. Would it be in our interest to suspend the rules now to not cut that conversation off in the middle of the process?
You are certainly welcome to make that motion. If you are going to make a motion to suspend the rules, I think what would be appropriate is to, either set a limit on how long we're going to go, to extend to a certain time, or to move that we're going to extend until debate is complete on this, or public comment is complete. I think we need to be specific about when we intend to end the meeting tonight.
I guess just to throw something out there, I would move to suspend the 9:30 rule so that tonight's meeting does not conclude until we take action on amendment number 3.
Okay, so there's a motion to suspend the rules to continue this meeting until we have taken action on amendment number 3. Is there a second on that motion?
I'll second.
Okay. Let's go ahead and call the roll on this motion. The motion is to keep going tonight until we've voted on amendment number 3.
Okay. Cochran.
So it's,
Oh, sorry.
I say no.
Burrell,
Yes.
Whistler,
Yes.
Seaboard,
Yes.
St. John,
No.
Sandberg,
Yes.
Herrera,
No.
Kate,
No.
Kinsey.
Yes.
I got passes 5-3 or 5-4.
Okay. With apologies to the women's basketball team, we will we will continue this. And I'll have to watch it on replay when we get home later. But let's go back to the discussion. I think we were at questions on amendment number 3, either for myself or staff. Any questions? Commissioner Kinsey, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I would like to understand a little bit more from staff, their intent and, for kind of keeping this in here to begin with.
Yes, I could try to answer the question with the intent with the space and time aspect. Again, when we released the draft back in the original proposal back in October, we didn't have those criteria in there, and we heard a lot of concerns about it. And when we released this revised proposal in February, the idea being is this allows us to monitor the evolution or reintroduction of duplexes throughout the community. The amendment that just passed, we are still able to do that. Just the conditional use process has been removed. Again, the time is something that we used with a similar process with the accessory dwelling units. We gave that a trial period for a couple of years, and now that's by right. It doesn't have those same conditions. So I believe that that's a good model for us to look to, because there has been so much concern over the introduction of plexes. And so that's why staff proposed those, the timing, establishment and spacing time criteria for the plexes, so that it does allow for a gradual pace to reintroduce plexes. Staff has the ability to report back to Plan Commission or City Council on the status of this as it moves forward. And again, we've talked about past examples when we were able to go back and amend and tweak the UDO as necessary. So that's sort of where our position is right now. We don't support it mostly because we don't want to create additional concerns from the community. And again, I think taking that iterative approach, we can reevaluate the needs to adjust this in the future. Thank you.
Okay, additional questions from commissioners? All right, seeing none, we'll go to public comment on amendment number 3 to ZO09-21. Again, if you'd like to make comment on this, you want to click the raise hand button, which you can find either under the participants button or the reactions button, depending on your version of Zoom. And if you can't find that, feel free to send a chat message to myself or to Jacqueline Scanlon, and we'll try to recognize you when it is your turn. So again, we're still on amendments here, so there are comments are limited to 3 minutes. 3 minutes to speak, and please state your full name for the record when you begin.
Peter?
Yes, hi, Peter Dorfman, near West Side. Speaking from one of the densest areas in the city, a neighborhood that is now 55% rental, and at least, I think this is an underestimate, at least 10% of the structures are currently multifamily. I want to speak against this amendment, even though I think the provision that you're proposing to take away is terribly inadequate to protect the interests of neighborhoods like this. This provision slows a little bit the proliferation of duplexes, but it doesn't limit that proliferation in any meaningful way. It's a roadmap for duplexing entire neighborhoods over time. If you live on a street with 5 houses, that neighborhood can become 100% duplex within 10 years. This resolution, this approach that planning has laid out fails or refuses to recognize that there might be a percentage of multifamily housing in a neighborhood beyond which population and rental density is destabilizing and permanently alters the standard of living in that neighborhood. It also ignores the existence of legacy plexes in the neighborhood. Again, we are at least 10% already multi-unit structures. This measure would treat the near west side as if there were no multi-unit structures at all. The buffer that's proposed here at 150 feet has one impact on a neighborhood like ours, with neighborhoods in the neighborhood with lots in the neighborhood of 4,000 square feet. It treats it exactly like a neighborhood with 6,000 square foot lots. If I lived in an R2 neighborhood, I would be incensed at that. But if we must have plexes, this is an approach that slows the process down a little bit, but I don't believe that's sufficient. I think actually we should try to put permanent limits on the density of plexes. This buffer should not be limited to 2 years as the city has proposed. It should be permanent, and it should be placed around all existing plexes, not just the proposed new ones. So again, I think this approach is deeply inadequate, but it's better than nothing. And I suggest that you keep it and oppose the current amendment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kathy Crabtree.
Hi, I'm Kathy Crabtree. And again, I'll just mention that I am a homeowner in the near west side and have been for over 7 years. I support this amendment. I do not agree with the 150-foot buffer around duplexes for a 2-year period. I can't say it as succinctly and eloquently as Commissioner Whistler did, but this places an unfair restriction upon a homeowner who might live next door to another homeowner or someone else who gets approval for a duplex. Duplexes, unlike what Mr. Dorfman seems to think, are not blights on our neighborhood. And having 2 or more duplexes in one block is not a problem. 2 years is a long time for a homeowner to wait to convert a house to a duplex. It's extremely arbitrary, and a cap on the number of duplexes is not needed. So I encourage the plan commissioners, and again, I am someone who is impacted by this vote. I encourage you to support this amendment and vote yes. We do not want a 150-foot buffer for 2 years. Thank you.
Thank you.
Daniel Bingham.
Hi, my name is Daniel Bingham, and I am in support of removing the 150-foot requirement for plexes. We've been talking about this, about increasing density using missing middle housing since at least 2019, possibly 2018. And the council decided in a lame duck session in 2019, at the very end of it, to shoot it down. Here we are talking about it again because this is a policy we really need in order to respond to the forces we are facing, including climate change, including housing affordability, including undoing the harms of structural racism. We don't have time to take things slowly where climate change is concerned. Cutting 50% of carbon emissions by 2030 is an overwhelming task. Increasing density contributes to that, because the more people we have living in the city where they can walk or bike to the destinations they need to get to, that's fewer emissions that are going to the atmosphere from driving. I served on the board of Bloomington Cooperative Living for 4 years. I was president of it for 3. I'm familiar with the process of housing development. My wife and I also built our own sustainable house on our property in the city. Building just a single family home, the design process, the build process alone took 6 months. The design process extended that out to more than a year. BCL recently acquired another property that they are developing into multifamily cooperative housing. That process has been 2+ years and isn't finished yet. Housing development is very slow. And when you're talking about missing middle housing, duplexes and triplexes, it's not, even if there is a quote unquote gold rush, even if there is a large rush to do this, it's still going to be very slow. You're still looking at 1, 2, 3 years before there's a significant increase in the amount of dense housing available in the city. We need people to move into the city. There are 30,000 people who commute into the city every day. That's 30,000 car trips we cannot afford to be happening right now. And we've got 9 years to cut our emissions in half. We need this to happen fast. We can't afford to take this slow. So I support, and then for our futures, for my generation's futures, for my kids' generation's futures, we're gonna have to take some policy risks. We're gonna have to try things that we're not totally confident will work out because they could work out. And because if we keep the status quo, we know things aren't gonna work out. So I urge you to support removing the 150-foot barrier. Let us try this. Let us see if it works. We can't take this too slow. We have to try it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Fleshman Warrens.
Hello, this is Dave Warren again. Thanks again for sticking around. I would like to support this amendment eliminating the 150-foot rule for 3 reasons. One, it pits neighbors against neighbors. For instance, let's say you want to turn your home into a duplex because your parents are getting older, want to move in with you. They can live on the other half of the duplex. If your neighbor or someone a couple doors down manages to get conditional approval, a month before you're out of luck for 2 years. That's not fair. This is using the zoning code to do something it's not really intended to do. Number 2, those with the deepest pockets and with the know-how to go through the conditional approval process are going to be those most likely to obtain conditional approval and get to build a duplex while others are not able to. And we all want more missing middle housing. And so to put this additional, to have this 150-foot rule in there kind of takes, one step back for the step and a half forward you take with allowing missing middle housing. Third is, this could potentially be gamed by someone who applies for conditional approval, gets the conditional approval, and then just sits on that property and does nothing. And so then everyone within a 150-foot radius is out of luck. They can't convert their single family home to a duplex or triplex because this rule can be gamed. Finally, I just want everyone to remember that this entire debate, this amendment and all other amendments and the UDO as a whole, as the city zoning code, it's largely not about any of us here. It's about folks who are going to be looking for a place to live in 2040, for a place to buy or a place to rent. And tens of thousands of those people have not even been born yet. And so just keep that in mind. Zoning it's a long-term planning tool to make things better, 20 years out into the future, and to make things, gradually better from here on out. But let's not lose sight of that, and let's stop using the zoning code for things it just is not intended to do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Margaret Clements. Sorry, Margaret, can you unmute?
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, well, I'd like to address some of the comments made by the prior speaker. Zoning does affect people right in the here and now, and that's why so many people are turning up. They feel threatened that they have spent their lives based on trying to predict a housing situation that they could afford in perpetuity. And these are game changers. So some of the comments that Mr. Warren made is that those with the deepest pockets will happen to be the ones who profit from this new zoning, from the building kind of demands. Well, those people with the deepest pockets happen to be from out of town. And so they can replicate the building process over and over again in duplexing the core neighborhoods, and they can profit mightily. But that aside, because there's so many faults with that prior argument, that I would like to just clarify some of the numbers that I came up with. Number one, those are housing units. Bedrooms vary anywhere from 0 to 6 beds per unit. And the hand database is only in bedrooms. The standard for multifamily housing is units, not bedrooms. And so just tonight, there was another discussion with Trinitas for yet another something close to 340 units at Kmart. Do you really know what you're doing? Are you really on top of these numbers? I would say that you are not. I spent 2 weeks coming up with the numbers myself, talking to the Monroe County Building Department, talking to the county tax assessor, going through the hand database, researching your ROI study. You vacillate between region, city, you vacillate so much in all of the conclusions that you're drawing to impact the life and the welfare of this community that I don't really think that there's a firm comparable number other than those that I gave forth tonight. So I'm firm in my numbers. 4,098 units, excluding the Trinitas property that was just discussed tonight, excluding the McDowell multifamily property of 120 units, excluding the Hillside and Huntington property, excluding everything that you're proposing over there by the hospital, and excluding everything that you are proposing over there by Switchyard Park. I'm firm in my numbers. Those are multifamily units, and I don't appreciate this shell game of numbers that just keep moving around so nobody can talk about them. So thank you.
Thank you.
Richard Lewis.
Hi, good evening. Richard Lewis once again. As I see our numbers in attendance are dropping, I guess this is a stamina game at this point, and I hope the IU women do well without us watching for the moment. I'm trying to think of polite and reasoned responses to this amendment, to which I am opposed, but I fear that any pretense or interest of a measured approach is just falling left and right with tonight's votes, because even against the recommendations of city planning staff, I know that the chair mentioned that this is in the interest of equitable treatment for people that would develop, but again, it is not equitable in that it is being focused on the core. And I regret it when the city and others value the core only for the assets that can be taken from it. These core neighborhoods were ignored for decades, and it was finally in 1985 when single-family zoning was applied to the core neighborhoods, at least on the west side. Shortly after a highway was, developers were attempting to build a highway directly through Prospect Hill neighborhood. It is not just, they do not have a value just for their walkability, just for closeness to amenities. There are other places that have that as well, but there are intrinsic values to these neighborhoods themselves. And I believe that is the concern with many residents, that folks who live outside these neighborhoods are saying, open them up. And there is no recognition of the existing value. And I'm not anti-development. Our neighborhood helped sponsor a developer who worked on grants to build the affordable Southern Knolls apartments that are within our neighborhood, just west of Walker Street, right near Rose Hill Cemetery, that serves people with developmental disabilities, people who have graduated out of homelessness, and people who meet certain affordability criteria. I think, as Carrie Thompson pointed out the other night, last Thursday, if you reach out and speak to the neighborhoods and build solutions from the ground up, we embrace you. I have found, at least in Prospect Hill, we're willing to work with you, and then we're proud of the accomplishments. But when we feel like we are under attack, with somebody saying, throw open the doors, let's make every parcel open to Plex development, then yes, we react defensively. So I would urge you to think carefully and please vote against this amendment. Thank you so much.
Chris Durbin?
Yes, I don't like being talked down to, and I've seen 4 different comprehensive plans in the city of Bloomington happen. I've seen ideas put into law. I've seen them bear fruit. I've seen what they do. And this is libertarian zoning. This is Jared Kushner, Trey Hollingsworth zoning to just open up these neighborhoods like this. The real tragedy is ADUs haven't even had a chance. And everybody's best story about helping their grandma or putting somebody else in their house or buying a house and renting out part of it, that's all by right with ADUs. We haven't, it's like we've forgotten all about that. And now we're just going to open it up and let the developers get involved in ways that we can't even predict or control. You know, what's interesting and great about ADUs, which I have supported in the last 2 comprehensive plans, by the way, before any of you were on this plan commission, the ADUs are the solution to respecting the homeownership and adding to the density. We're asking, how do we settle this divided town down? Look, the ADU, you can buy that house that you can't quite afford unless you can have an apartment in it. By right, the ADU, it's there. You don't go to meetings, you don't pay $50, you don't pay $100, you don't pay a developer lawyer. That's why we've supported it. The only condition, we just wanted it as a conditional use because it made sense, but it's going in by right. We're okay with that. But this is something that can please both sides of this divide. But this irresponsible opening up, thinking this will magically help people and won't hurt anybody and it'll be fine and you can always still build a single family house. This is just irresponsible behavior and taking a totally open, trusting the free market. My God, if there's one thing I've learned is the market has a brain, but it does not have a heart. It doesn't care about the people who are in these neighborhoods. They're numbers, and density is numbers. These are homes. These are places people have put their lives into, have invested in. 30-year mortgages. Oh, let's change it. Let's just put it in a notebook. Let's just pop it back and forth. The ADU, think about it. We've forgotten all about it. It takes time. The argument against ADUs, there haven't been enough. This stuff takes time. Find a way to get both sides to be all right with this added density. Don't make it a civil war of ideology. It's like a religious conflict. Let's get real and look at our own community. Thank you.
I do just want to jump in very quickly before we go to the next commenter. I just want to remind everybody that public comment right now is supposed to be on Commissioner Whistler's amendment. It's not a time for comment just generally on Z009-21. It's on the amendment specifically.
Yeah, thank you, Mike.
William Coulter?
It's good.
Mr. Coulter, are you there? There you go.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yep.
My name is William Coulter. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. Please vote no on amendment number 3. The administration's response to resident concerns about plexes and student rentals is inadequate, but this particular provision, the space and time separation requirements, are the only part of that response that is relatively easy to enforce. For those of us who plan to live out our lives in Elm Heights, it is a small comfort to know that the pace at which student rentals consume the neighborhood may be somewhat slower than it would otherwise be. Passing amendment number 3 would remove even that small comfort. I'm aware of the coming demographic shift and the imminent drop in IU enrollment, increasing enrollment is not necessary for new units in Elm Heights to be occupied by students, those living away from campus who wanted to be nearer but couldn't find a vacant unit will be able to move closer to campus. At a certain point, entire blocks, such as those on Hunter Avenue between Woodlawn and Henderson, become unattractive to people who must work for a living. If you're trying to make new housing for anyone other than students, you have to do something in Elm Heights to prevent students from consuming any new units that you create. It's a unique situation. And if you vote yes on this amendment, you're just going to accelerate that process by which students consume any new units that are created. And frankly, you apparently do not understand the dynamics in this neighborhood. You know, buying both units in a duplex will be more expensive than buying a single family home. Units in Elm Heights rent for $700 a bedroom. Bidding against landlords in this neighborhood for even a single unit will be a heavy lift for someone who's having difficulty with housing affordability. Landlords in the neighborhood already own many units suitable for duplex conversion. These will not be available as potential home ownership opportunities. One of those units is immediately north of me. I already live across the street from one duplex, and there's a triplex behind me. The current student residents are good neighbors, and the landlord has been responsible, but things change. You know, units get sold, new tenants move in, they don't behave the way that the previous tenants did. Thanks.
Thank you.
Aobon Binder.
Hey, everyone. Yeah, thanks for sticking this out and listening to public comment again. I want to tell a quick story because I think it is kind of relevant. When I was a kid in the Bronx, my family lived in a duplex, and our landlady and her brother lived upstairs, and my parents and I lived on the ground floor. And yeah, especially at that time, my parents didn't have a lot of money, but we were able to afford to live in New York City because, I mean, we weren't renting an entire row house. That really would have been totally out of my parents' reach. And anyway, eventually we moved to Milwaukee in Wisconsin, and that's a city where about 20% of all houses are duplexes. And it's very common there to own one side of a duplex or own a whole duplex. And anyway, even though I don't live there now, a lot of people that I went to high school with still do live there, and a lot of them own a duplex, or they own half a duplex. So there's whole neighborhoods of duplexes, and honestly, no one thinks anything of it. I mean, it's totally normal. There are rundown neighborhoods of duplexes. There are vibrant and beautiful neighborhoods of duplexes. Duplexes are in every neighborhood there, and they are a treasured type of housing for college kids and old Polish ladies and young professionals and working class families. So I really get to thinking sometimes this whole debate about duplexes and splitting hairs on stuff like, do we need 150 feet between them? It's about values more than anything. And trying to space out duplexes strikes me as like the last gasps of the old American dream of a single family house. But, even if that is your dream, it's not everyone's dream. And even for those that have that dream, a unit in a duplex or a triplex or something, maybe it's a stepping stone to owning a single family home later. So what I want to say here is please vote yes on this amendment. I think we need all the housing options we can get. If it gets out of hand and we suddenly wind up with a bunch of new duplexes, a bunch of new housing units downtown, remember, that's what we're talking about here, housing units. I mean, wouldn't that be a good problem to have? So again, please vote yes on this amendment. There are plenty of chances to keep tweaking it, keep revising it, and monitoring the situation. We've seen how slow the rollout of ADUs has been. when we place a lot of restrictions on where they can go and how they're built. And I really don't think we have the time anymore to make the same mistake with duplexes. Thanks.
Thank you.
Dave Weaver.
Hello, thank you very much for sticking this out. I definitely think you should vote against the 150-foot thing, so vote yes on the amendment to strike it. As it's has been mentioned, it doesn't seem fair to various types of homeowners. And just as a quick aside, we years ago owned a giant duplex in Indianapolis where there were many, many duplexes, and we lived on one side and we rented the other, just as people are discussing. And we owned the whole thing, but lived in one half and rented the other, and it worked out great. It was a great way to have a great place to live, but save some money. Great tax advantages to that. So I think you might find that turned out to be really attractive to people going forward. It's a interesting and good way to build density. I'll yield the rest of my time. Thank you.
Thank you. Jackie, who's next?
Okay, I think it's me. Hold on. Mute that. Okay. My husband Dave just spoke. His thing was still on. Okay. So yeah, a couple of things about this. First of all, I support this amendment wholeheartedly. I think it's not true that that anyone who's in favor of taking away barriers are only people who live outside the neighborhoods. We've already heard at least a few homeowners in the core neighborhoods be in favor of density, and I'll add my voice to that. I'm frankly offended by comments about students living in areas near campus and how horrible it is to have students in areas living near campus. I mean, we all love living in these areas near campus because of the campus. And living in Bloomington, you should assume that students are going to live in your neighborhood if you live near campus. So I really don't understand the vilification of students. I don't find them annoying. Sometimes they're better than others, but sometimes I've had other like totally normal neighbors, non-students, who are better than others. So I just don't see that. It really offends me. What was said about ADUs, I do wish like people would use ADUs, but if you read the UDO, the ADUs have limits, and those limits can prevent them from being a true duplex. So I don't think that that's necessarily an alternative to duplex. It might be in addition to duplex. And then the very first thing that came to my mind when I read that, the 150-foot thing, was the gaming thing that Dave Warren mentioned. I mean, if there are no fees, I mean, I'm in the Bryant Park neighborhood. If I drive around Bryant Park, I see signs in lawns that say, you know, basically, I didn't vote for you, Mayor Hamilton, to ruin my neighborhood. And if each of those persons disingenuously submit plans for a duplex, like what's to stop them from just stopping any duplexes within 150 feet around them? I just don't understand how that can be monitored so fairly. So all of those things really strike me as super unfair and super exclusionary. And I wholeheartedly hope that you all vote for this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sam Curry.
Yes, thank you. I would like to speak in support of this amendment. Just with requirements like these that put, time and space separation requirements, I think we would find it very odd if we regulated any other good, any other commodity in such a manner, especially something that it's as crucial that we have enough of it as housing. an area where it's so important that there is enough housing in the area for the overall health of the community. Duplexes are not brownfields, and they do help people live in areas that will help them live their lives. And so people, should have the freedom and the right to take reasonable actions with the property that they own, including converting it into a duplex. And so I think approving this amendment would help the community meet its needs. I hope it's approved by the committee. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jeff Richardson.
Thank you so much. I just want to quickly say that I'm a 30-year renter, and it's only in the last 22 plus years that I became a homeowner. I rented in Bloomington for 12 years, and 4 of those years I represented District 6 on the Bloomington City Council. And I take very seriously the issues raised tonight by people concerned about this particular issue. I do not support this amendment, but it does not mean in any way that I'm anti-student. I love students. I lived here for 12 years. When I lived in New York, I lived in the NYU area. When I lived in Washington, D.C., I lived in the Georgetown area. And just quickly on the Georgetown front, a very active neighborhood, not only the neighborhood association overall, but by blocks. And what these kinds of rules do, and they have them in DC, in Georgetown, one of the most historic areas in the country, it enhances communication, collaboration, and community feel. And from our survey that we took after a convenient location, community feel was over 60% of the people. That's why they love these neighborhoods. And also a lot of these neighbors, even though they wanted to hit the pause button, nearly 42% supported ADUs, and another 35% supported density on the edges. So people do want reasonable growth. What they want is collaboration. I'd even say on the previous amendment that was discussed and already voted on, it's really about people connecting, people collaborating with each other. That's the value that we're trying to advance here. So it's not pro or con, it's actually how can we enhance it? And certainly Commissioner Kate's amendment, which we will not hear now, but was also about enhancing communication and connectivity. That's the value we want to enhance. And frankly, since I've been back here in Bloomington, which I love, and I love it because of the students, that's why I'm here, is because I'm troubled that there seems to be a lack of listening, a lack of connectivity, a lack of communication. So I see what the city is trying to do here is to enhance communication, enhance connectivity, and we're all really, I hope, working toward that end. So please don't frame this as a student, anti-student issue. I love students. My whole life, I've lived near and by students. And I hope that as we move forward, we do not frame this in a us versus them area. I love Bloomington. I get choked up talking about it. This is the best city in the world. I could have lived anywhere in the world, my partner and I, anywhere. And we chose to live in Bloomington because people respect each other and are civil. And I want to thank you, especially Brad, for doing such a good job in running these meetings. But please don't let this student versus non-student business take hold. Thank you so much.
Patrick Murray.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. Thank you. My name is Patrick Murray. I live in the Prospect Hill neighborhood. And I would ask you to vote no on this particular amendment, the elimination of the 150-foot rule. So I would like to support the staff in keeping the 150-foot rule. This is an old neighborhood. My house is 120 years old. We did a gut rehab 28 years ago. And this is a neighborhood of lots and lots of small houses on tiny lots. And it probably isn't feasible to make very many of them into duplexes. But I do think that there's a process where we could work with staff to increase density in some parts of the neighborhood. Not every part of the neighborhood can accommodate a duplex, but there are parts of the neighborhood where a duplex would fit in quite well. And so I think we need to consider staff's opinion in terms of what works best for them and for the community. And I think what we need to do right now, I support the previous speaker's comments about collaboration and working with the city and working with the staff to make the city the best possible place that it can be. But I think we need to be careful and proceed incrementally. So please keep the 150-foot rule for now. If it turns out that it doesn't work in the future, that's another discussion. So thank you very much.
Jim? Go ahead.
Click start.
Yeah, you're in.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great, thanks. I have heard over and over that we don't need to worry. I live in Elm Heights, and that in Elm Heights, we don't need to worry about losing the neighborhood or having a big problem. That hasn't really been fleshed out. It's hard to, we've already voted against the plexes one time, and now maybe they're coming back again, maybe not. But it would be helpful for me, and I think for a lot of residents of the neighborhood, to start to define what would cause a turnoff. What would it look like? That just hasn't been addressed. Or if it's not going to be, if there are not going to be a lot of numbers, why don't we reassure homeowners and set a limit? We could vary those limits from neighborhood to neighborhood. But just to say it's going to be okay, well, I'm in residential construction. It's not that expensive for a lot of houses to become a duplex. We have a lot of small rental houses that could be converted. So I want to believe you, I really do. I'm very worried, but I'm very worried for the neighborhood. And I think a lot of residents are, and it would be very helpful to see this is the kind of mix we would like to see ahead. Otherwise, it's hard not to think that we'll be looking at in Elm Heights, where we have a strong student market, a student monoculture. We have that evidence right here in the neighborhood. So again, I'm just asking for a transition from the 150-foot limit to something that's more specific in terms of numbers and percentages. Thank you.
Thank you.
Janice Sorby.
Hi, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Hi, this is Jan Sorby again. And I don't know if you know, but my husband and I actually own a fourplex. And we're probably the only people that will show up at these hearings that own a fourplex. I also lived in duplexes exclusively as a child growing up in Flint, Michigan. And I'm asking you to reject this proposal tonight. Neighborhoods across Bloomington vary greatly. And I don't understand why we're only talking about the core neighborhoods. I think that we should be talking about areas in other sort of nodes around the city where there is high employment opportunities like the College Mall. And each area needs to have a different answer for how to limit or how to control or how to find that balance between home ownership and rental. For example, in the core neighborhoods, in my neighborhood, Bryant Park, which by the way has absolutely zero control in terms of historic preservation. We had too many landlords that fought against any kind of historic preservation here. 150 feet, the buffer encompasses 4 or 5 homes. In Hoosier Acres, it's 1 or 2. So in different neighborhoods, we need different solutions. And I think that the idea of uncontrolled or unlimited duplexes in the core can be a problem. So please keep that 150-foot buffer. And other cities that have large universities do different things. In Pennsylvania, many municipalities have imposed a minimum distance required between student rentals, not just duplexes. This goal was established to ensure that a tipping point doesn't happen. Philadelphia took an extraordinary step of prohibiting student housing of all kinds. This dramatic move was in response to neighbors' concerns about rental cost, increasing the loss of affordable single-family housing due to student housing, much of what you're hearing tonight. Some jurisdictions in Minnesota have limited the total number of rental licenses available in certain neighborhoods to encourage home ownership, affordability, and to restrict the number of student rentals. It goes on and on and on, and there are all kinds of solutions. So I call for you to keep the 150-foot buffer, but also to find a way that we can have a better system of finding good answers. There's lots of good answers out there. And if we can slow this down, if we can push that pause button and all get together and find better answers for different areas in the city, that would be fabulous. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wendy Bernstein.
Hi, I'm trying to keep a level head in this conversation, which is pretty complex and long. But the overview is that I'm an older member of the community, and I so respect the welcoming idealism of all the people who support plexes everywhere with few limitations. But at my age, in this later developmental stage of adulthood, the kind of community feel that I'm comfortable with doesn't really extend to having party houses where lots and lots of students congregate outdoors a lot of the time, making noise and drinking and dropping their beer cups all over the place. So I get a kick out of seeing them when I'm walking closer to campus, but I don't relish the prospect of their moving very close to where I live. And luckily, next door to me, the students were not numerous and they didn't have great big parties. So I do have some self-interests that I would like to protect for my old age, because I would like to end my days in the home and neighborhood that has had all different ages and kinds of people moving in and out, but the neighborhood feel hasn't changed drastically. So I'm quite disappointed that we're kind of plexing the whole city. And indeed, I am very perplexed as to how this came on so very quickly. And that disappoints me quite a lot. But I would love us to have not just a zero-sum game of binary solutions, the 150-foot buffer, a time span limit. I'd rather we could come up with other win-win solutions for the city as a whole. And this process has felt very uncomfortable to me. And the way this meeting has gone has not felt that comfortable, because there's too much name calling and too much generational divide. I respect idealism, but I think we need a lot of reality checks as well. So thank you all so much for spending so much time in one evening. I wish we'd had more time over months. Thanks.
Thank you.
Deborah Meyerson.
Hi, it's late. I'll keep it short. I just want to express my voice in favor of this amendment. I think it will otherwise really skew the whole potential for duplexes. Again, as Dave Warren said earlier about pitting neighbors against neighbors, Aob and Binder, we don't have time to make mistakes. And finally, Karen St. John, go big or go home. You know, we just need to do this and do it well and do it right. And making the option for duplexes available to people who would like to include them. It means that maybe, you know, my son who has developmental disabilities is not going to live on his own, but maybe we could have a duplex. And that way, you know, he could rent and live with a roommate in half. He doesn't have to live with his parents his whole life. And that way he gets some independence and we do too. So there's lots of people out there who would enjoy and appreciate duplexes, and removing the barriers is an important step to do that. So I appreciate your consideration in supporting this amendment.
Thank you.
Okay, I think Pam spoke already, but I'm going to double check again.
I did speak already. If I shouldn't speak again, you can tell me I can't speak again.
Yeah, sorry, we're limited to one bite at the apple per person here tonight. Is there anyone else who would like to make public comment? I do see one more hand here.
Russ Skiba, you should be unmuted.
Yes, hi. This is Russ Skiba from the Hoosier Acres neighborhood, and you'll be pleased to know that the IU women are doing very well. The score is tied at 19-19 with about 5 minutes left in the second quarter. So just thought you'd want to know that. I thank the Plan Commission for this opportunity to speak. As I said, I also represent Go Farther Together, and I'd like to say a little bit about the kind of people who have concerns about what's going on with this proposal. They include an ex-mayor, 4 former city council members, 3 former county commissioners, and other community leaders, including the former IU assistant vice president and Indiana University architect, and 3 other noted Bloomington architects, and the 20-year director of Monroe County Habitat for Humanity. The Hit the Pause Button initiative, crafted by those and other Go Farther Together members, has received the support of the Monroe County League of Women Voters.
I'm sorry, Russ, I'm going to jump in on you here. I want to make sure comments tailored to Amendment 3 and nothing more than that, okay?
Yes. I believe I should say these things about it because, you know, there have been a number of comments that this is perhaps not a real organization, but an organization that's been pulled from other organizations and is kind of just emerged overnight to take this on. I'm just making the point here that some of the members of, many of the members of this organization are in fact longtime residents of Bloomington with 20, 30, 40, 50, in Charlotte Zitlow's case, 50 years of experience.
Mr. Skiba, that's
Thank you.
that's wonderful, but you do need to keep your comments related to.
Okay, I have some comments then about this proposal. I would echo Margaret Clements' comments about zoning. Zoning is a protection, and this amendment, like the previous amendment, takes away some of those protections. We consider ourselves a progressive community, but removing more and more protections from regulation is not protecting our community. It is not progressive. It is an example of deregulation of land use, which has been used in far from progressive ways in deregulating civil rights, environmental protections, and a host of other issues. I would point you to the current YIMBY Act in Congress being sponsored by Representative Trey Hollingsworth and Senator Todd Young. If you consider them progressive, it's time to consider these issues. I urge us to hit the pause button to consider where these ideas come from in the long term. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
John Lawrence.
Is there any?
Sorry. There's 2
Sorry,
more.
go ahead. I didn't see any more hands
There's
raised.
2 more. If you're planning to raise your hand, please do it now so we can have an idea of how many we have coming. Thank you.
Shall I start?
Yep. Thanks, John.
Hi, John Lawrence from Bryant Park Neighborhood Association. I want to applaud everyone for their patience tonight, and I just want to say that I oppose this amendment, and thank you very much.
Good for him.
Thank you.
RM.
Hi, I would just like to say, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for sticking with it for so long. I want to say that I support this amendment, and racial restrictions. Let me rephrase that. The prevalence of exclusionary land use policies exacerbate social segregation by deterring any racial and economic integration. Restrictive from the standpoint of economic efficiency. Regulations that limit density also decrease the total housing supply of a region. And I think it's extremely important that we are more inclusive in Bloomington instead of continuing to pass things that are barriers to our brothers and sisters. And I hope that you vote for this amendment. I yield the rest of my time. Thank you.
Mark Roblewski.
Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me? All right, Mark Robleski here. I oppose this amendment and I hope you vote against it. And please stop destroying the core neighborhoods. Thank you.
Oh, how racist. That's it right there. That's just.
Okay, we have Eric.
Yes, thank you. My name is Eric Ost. I asked you to vote no on the amendment now being considered to remove the 150-foot buffer and the 2-year qualifying conditions for duplexes. In effect, this amendment will further potentiate the market, but will not produce significantly more affordable housing and will not increase housing equity in Bloomington. Increasing more rapid concentrated creation of duplexes, and especially incenting those duplexes in our community's core neighborhoods, will be moving us in the wrong direction. One of the commenters asked, what is the criteria for success? I think if we remove opportunities to determine success, which sort of the 150-foot buffer and the 2-year qualifying condition does, then I would ask, what is the criteria for success and how will we know when we've achieved it? Anyway, I would ask you to vote no on the amendment to remove the 150-foot buffer and the 2-year qualifying conditions for duplexes. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment on amendment number 3?
I don't see any in there, none on Facebook.
Okay, last call for public comment on amendment number 3. Going once, going twice. Okay, we are back to the commission for final comment on amendment number 3. Any commissioners like to make a final comment? Commissioner Kate.
Yeah, when I first saw the 150-foot buffer in the year, I had some questions and some concerns about the issue that you mentioned earlier, Brad, about pitting neighbor against neighbor. Although I will say that to some extent that concern, and also the concern about people sort of rushing in, kind of sits uneasily with earlier statements about there's not going to be a big gold rush and there's not going to be a rush to the door and it takes time to develop these and there won't be a lot of incentive and so on. I guess my sense is this is, and we know because it told us it's the staff's effort to try to be more collaborative with the neighbors who are concerned about that gold rush and try to move in a somewhat more cautious direction and take, some time to figure out what it's going to look like, and not very much time. I'm not sure that this would have necessarily been kind of my choice in the way to try to do that. I actually think some sort of developed cap that could change with time and need might be a better approach. But I am thinking that at least retaining some ability to kind of gauge over a couple year period how this is going makes sense. I mean, I don't love it. I'm not sure anyone loves it. I think that it raises questions about people trying to rush in if they need to do this or they want to do this. But at the same time, when we're hearing that building takes time and this isn't going to happen overnight anyway, I guess I wonder how much is at stake. So it's a tough call. This is, like I said, I'd prefer to see another way to try to measure this movement. But at this point, I'm inclined to vote against the amendment and retain some sort of buffer. And then if that could be replaced with something that addresses the issues that you raise about fairness, about the arbitrariness of it, if you will, and about the potential to incentivize people to rush in with something else, then I'd probably prefer to see that happen and replace this. That's all I've got.
Thank you. Commissioner St. John, go ahead.
Thank you. Just building on Commissioner Cates' good comments there, I had a question for staff, if that's okay. Is it such that with that provision that someone can, I know we've heard this, someone can get the approval and hold it for 2 years and not actually develop, and then that holds up their next door neighbor? Is that correct?
That could happen, correct.
Yeah, so that could happen. Okay, so then could it also happen that a neighbor, like the gaming idea, a neighbor on each side does that, and so now this person in the middle is held up for 4 years?
Yeah, I mean, if one property was in more than one buffer, they're subject to all buffers. So if you have a buffer that starts in April of 21 and your neighbor on the other side envelops you in a buffer that starts in April of 23, then yes, that would extend your time.
You're out for 4 years.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Can I follow up on that with a question? Because I think that's a great question. Jackie,
go ahead.
Can you say a little bit more about the process so that we can have a sense of how likely that is and how, if there are any hurdles to that? In other words, how easy is it to game versus you're going to have to dedicate some too much time, effort, money, resources, et cetera, to go through the process enough to make that worthwhile if you're not serious?
Sure, I think the answer depends on who you ask, so I'll give you my answer. The conditional use approval is all that's required, right? So when you go to do the conditional use, you have to show that you meet the 10 conditions plus the specific standards. If you can meet those, without expending money for design of a house, beyond what you need to be able to show, then you could sit on it after that. I think it just depends on how serious, you're serious about building a duplex. You probably have pretty good plans to take to the Board of Zoning Appeals. If you're more serious about just creating a freeze in your area, then you could probably get an approval by spending less money on the plans and things that are required. I think there are options. I don't know if that answers your question.
I mean, the only other thing I guess that would help answer it is, what is your sense from your experience of whether that happens? Does it happen in other areas
Ryan,
with this kind of conditions?
I just want to add that the conditional use, based on amendments to approval, conditional use isn't proposed to be in the language. It'll be based on CZC, which is Certificate of Zoning Compliance, which is a much lower threshold than what Jackie was just speaking about.
So sorry, I was away, but I did know that. Apologies. Thank you for correcting me on that. Yeah, so it'll be whether or not you can meet those requirements. And in order to pull your building permit, you actually will need realized plans. So in reality, it would probably actually be more expensive than it would be to do your conditional use approval. Because for example, on a duplex, you have to have separate meters. So you're gonna have to go through CBU and then show us that you have the ability to put separate 2 meters in. So it's actually probably a higher threshold for like kind of a faux approval for a new build, I'd say. Current build, you know, would depend. An existing building would depend on what kind of remodel is required. But again, with the separate utility requirement, I do think that it would. I do think that it could be substantial.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional questions or final comment from commissioners? Commissioner Cockrum. Go. You are muted, I believe.
There we go. All right. So I support this amendment for all the reasons that Commissioner Wessler stated. And for me, it's all about protecting property rights for all. I do not support one owner's action restricting another property owner. I also, we're not talking about this right now, but it's been brought up, but I also don't support putting limits on the number of duplexes. Once again, the neighborhood hits that number, it would affect the value of the other properties. So anytime you put restrictions on the supply on anything, you push prices up and down. And I would not support having the UDO having this effect on property owners. And I'll say this probably in other statements as well, but the complete control of the number of duplexes that are developed in a core neighborhood are in the control of the current homeowner. If an investor approaches them to purchase their property, they can just say no. In fact, you could even go one step further and you could actually put a restriction in your deed that would prevent your property from ever becoming a duplex, triplex, or quad forever. And I say this, but I would never recommend it because anytime you put a restriction on a property, you affect its value and either up or down. So, but really the homeowners themselves, in my opinion, have the complete control. They say they get approached by investors, but they don't have to sell to them. So again, I support this amendment for all the reasons stated.
Thank you. Any additional comments, final comments from commissioners? Commissioner Herrera.
Right. I believe that, I'm in favor of having more opportunities, housing, but I believe this is this would be an implementation of something new, and I would like to see first an assessment of how this goes first, instead of just rushing and releasing options, the free option. I am in favor of having some kind of a cap or regulation during the first phase of the first time that we implement this, if this passes. But I would like to see first an assessment than going just for all in without knowing if there is any potential consequence. So once again, I'm in favor of housing, as I mentioned in the beginning, but at the same time, we would need some kind of caution to not to regret if we just release and open, as some of the citizens mentioned, open it up just this fast.
Thank you. Additional comments, Commissioner Kinsey.
One concern I have is in relation to how this original amendment or red line was created, which was associated with a conditional use. And now that it's associated with a certificate of zoning, it seems to have a different impact. I know when Jackie was just describing it, I don't think I grasped the full effect of what she was describing would happen now, but it sounds like it's going farther down the road before something would be stopped. And it seems potentially more unfair. And I don't like necessarily adopting, I guess I have concerns about adopting or allowing this to go forward, since it was developed with a conditional use in mind, and now that's not what's the case anymore. So I guess I just worry a little bit that it may not be doing exactly what it was intended to do initially, now that it's changed. So if somebody on staff can see that as not a worry, that would be good to know. But it sounds like it's different since it was created originally with the conditional use in mind. I don't know if anybody has a comment about that.
Let me see if I can. When we put it in the use specific standard, we did that intentionally so that if someday it were to become permitted, then it would still apply, the 150. If we had wanted it to be linked only to the conditional use, we would have added it as a conditional use standard, meaning that once that went away, it went away. So I'm not sure if that quite answers your question. Okay.
Any additional comments from commissioners? Okay, well, I will just kind of add my final comment, which is just to say, I'm really afraid that this particular provision is almost a bit of a poison pill. If our intent is in a couple of years to take a look at what's happening and take stock, I'm afraid this provision will skew those results. If you put yourselves in the shoes of two different types of property owners and consider their situation, a homeowner who lives in their home who's considering adding a second unit. They've got to save the money to plan for that. They've got to save the money for architecture and for building. And it's very likely for a homeowner, an owner-occupied home, that this is going to be a process that takes quite some time. So the decision to add a second unit, they're not going to make the second this becomes legal. If you are an out-of-town property owner who owns lots of properties and has a big account with cash in it for renovations and repairs, and you've got your own architects on staff, or you're buying architecture services in bulk, it's a much easier decision. And so my fear is that if this provision is in there, you're going to see the professional landlord take advantage of this at the expense of the owner-occupied unit homeowner. And so I think this will virtually guarantee that the number of duplexes created in the first couple of years will skew towards rentals that are owned by professional landlords, and that's my fear. In addition to, like I said, it being an issue of fairness, I think a firm overall cap on the number of duplexes, although I'm not sure I would support that, but that would be a much fairer approach than to say whoever gets there first gets to build their duplex, and if you come second, sorry, you're just out of luck. So I would encourage my colleagues to support this amendment. And if you do think that we need some sort of a mechanism to restrain the preponderance of duplexes, then please introduce another amendment to put some sort of uniform cap in the zone, or even at a smaller level, but just simply say that you can't have one because your neighbor got there first, I think is just the wrong way to try to restrain growth. So obviously my amendment, I'll vote to support it. Oh, I see Commissioner Kate, you have
Yeah, I'll just react to that. I mean, I agree with that, actually. I share that worry. And I think that talking about some overall cap would be a better way to go. And so that's something that I will take up with the staff and with you all after this to see about an additional amendment. I appreciate Commissioner Cockrum's comments about the ill effects of the cap as well, by trying to figure out if there's some sort of way to assess how, that could aid the ongoing monitoring of this. I think it's worth looking at. So anyway, thank you. See, the process works, as Commissioner St. John said earlier. I will vote to support the amendment and take this off and then work toward what I think would be a better solution.
Okay, any additional comment before we call the roll? Okay, seeing none, I think we're ready for a vote. Jackie, would you call the roll, please, on amendment number 3 to ZO09-21?
Herrera,
No.
Seaborg,
No.
Sandberg,
No.
Cockrum,
Yes.
Kate,
Yes.
Whistler,
Yes.
Kinsey,
Yes.
St. John,
Yes.
Burrell.
Yes.
6-3 amendment passes.
All right, thank you. So we are now at the end of our rules. So we did suspend the rules to allow debate to continue on that. Unless there is another motion to further suspend the rules and continue debate, we are going to adjourn by the.
One question.
Sorry.
I do want to make sure you continue the petition to the next meeting, however, just to be clear about that.
Unless you're going to see it tonight. If you vote to see
Yes.
it, you can still do that.
Okay.
But,
right. So yeah.
So I have a question. So what was the vote? The final tally?
final tally
That was 6-3, I believe.
6-3. Yes.
I have just a quick question too. Should I just go ahead and withdraw my amendment, or is that mooted and there's nothing else that needs to be done procedurally on that?
I believe it's oh, sorry, go ahead, Brad.
I was going to say, I believe it is moot. If that amendment were introduced and did pass, it would cause some irreconcilable differences, I think. But we can, I think, discuss offline. And if there's another, if you want to modify, you'll have that opportunity. That doesn't mean you can't introduce that amendment or some variation thereof if you still like to at the next meeting.
That amendment is done, I think, based on our vote on doing this by right. The other amendment I'll work on separately.
I think we would prefer that you say that you would like to withdraw that amendment. If that's
okay. That can happen at the next meeting. It doesn't happen immediately.
Oh, okay. All right. That's fine.
So, yeah, I think it would be appropriate to have a, sorry, bear with me one moment. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Sorry, my batteries are dying on the AirPods here. Yeah, I think it would be appropriate now to have a motion to continue the discussion on consideration of 09-21 to our next meeting, which will be Thursday, April 1st at 5:30 p.m. Would someone like to make that motion?
I'll motion to continue petition ZO0921 until the next meeting on Thursday, April 1st.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Just as a reminder, what that means is unless there are any additional amendments submitted, we'll come back Thursday and we will be on the discussion of the final recommendation on this petition. There will be another public comment period. As the rules stand right now, that would leave a comment period of 5 minutes per person on our final recommendation. So that's probably enough to fill our agenda on Thursday. But if we were to get through that, we will also then move on to consideration of the map itself. So ZO 10-21. So so a vote for a yes vote here is to continue ZO 09-21 and effectively adjourn this meeting.
Seabour,
Yes.
Sandberg,
Yes.
Cockrum,
Yes.
Kate,
Yes.
Whistler,
Yes.
Kinsey,
Yes.
St. John,
Yes.
Burrell,
Yes.
and Herrera.
Yes.
9-0. Thank you.
All right, motion carries. Thank you all so much for your patience and for your input tonight. Go Hoosiers. We'll see you all on Thursday.